This is the Fly Culture Podcast with me, your host, Pete Tigis. Damon Valentine is one of the younger breed of fly anglers that are searching out wild fish across the UK. A lifelong angler from Yorkshire, he travels the country and beyond with a fly rod. I talked to him about how he sees fly fishing now and in the future, salmon fishing and trout in the Wandle. Welcome everyone to the very latest Fly Culture podcast. We're down here again in Devon. I'm very fortunate that Damon Valentine's come down to see us here. We're based, and we're doing this one at the Fox and Hounds Hotel, which is right on the banks of the River Tor. We can just stroll outside and the river's just there, so we're really, really close to it. It's my spiritual home, it's my home river, and I'm really pleased to have Damon down here to chat a little bit about fishing. And good to have you, Damon.
It's great to be here, yeah.
We're hoping that we're going to hit the Tor a little bit later. We've had some rain. The river has come up a little bit last few days. My wife Emma was fortunate enough to catch a nice 8-pound salmon yesterday. So once we've done this, we're going to go and head down and see if we can swing some flies and see what we can find. But having Damon along has been something I've wanted to do because being an old fossil myself, I was really interested to see how the younger people in fly fishing were looking at fly fishing, and people like Damon, Dale Parsons, Philippa Hake, Johnny Muir, Tom Clinton, a lot of these guys out there, and there's lots I've forgotten as well, but I should name check, but who are out there fly fishing, catching wild fish in great places. And I wanted to try and get a view from a younger angler, but I think probably the first place to really start in the natural place is at the very beginning. As I said in the intro, Damon, you're from Yorkshire. Has it always been rivers for you?
Yeah. I was very fortunate as a kid when I was growing up. I could see the river from my bedroom window. My granddad used to take me. He was the local bailiff, so he used to pick me up after school most evenings during the spring, the summer, the autumn, plonk me at the bridge at the top of the beat, go and do his rounds and leave me to fish for a little while, and then come back and fish with me. So I was obsessed with trout from a really young age.
Fantastic. And it's always been trout, or it's morphed into salmon over time? And
well, I mean, where we were on the river that we were, the Ribble, it was trout in the spring, sort of early summer. Then you'd get a trickle of sea trout. And then you would get the salmon sort of from August onwards. It's a good 50 miles from the sea.
Right.
So water permitting, you would start to see migratory fish. And then I moved to a little place called Clitheroe in my teens to go to high school, which is across the border in Lancashire. So that was controversial. But that was mid-river, which meant that the sea trout were in the system from about June onwards. When I was 11, I met my best friend, Peter. We're still best friends to this day. He's going to be the best man at my wedding.
Wonderful.
And it was really him and his dad that took it to the next level with obsession. So, instead of chasing girls as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, in the summer holidays and whatnot, I was tying flies and going down the River Hodder and fishing till 3, 4 a.m. in the morning. Generally not catching anything, but just on occasion you'd catch a sea trout, and that was enough to keep you going until the next time you caught one. So
it's interesting. The Ribble, James Gilbraith, who also writes for Fly Culture, I'm hoping to do a podcast with him very shortly. Fishes the Ribble as well, and a friend, Jim Fern, as well. Are big fans of the river. I get the feeling it's similar to the Tor, that it's not big numbers of salmon. We have a good year is about 300 salmon. And
yeah, I think the. Do you mean catches 300?
Yeah.
It's pretty similar. I mean, it's an up and down river. I mean, you refer to me as a young angler. I'm 35 this year.
That's still young to me. Yeah.
Which to me is 5 years away from 40, which is a bit scary. But I've been fishing for 30 years, and I'd say 28 of that has been on the Ribble.
Brilliant.
And now I'm at a point where I can say, I remember when it was better, which is a sad thing to say, but I guess it just goes to show that, when I was a kid, my granddad would take me to the weir in Settle at Bridgend, and in October, and you could guarantee you would sit there and you could see fish trying to get up the weir. But particularly in the last 5 years, you've got to be really lucky to get to the sort of, there could be water all week long, but you might only have a short window to see fish. There just isn't as many as there used to be, and obviously that's a big problem everywhere.
And with your granddad, his time frame's been slightly longer. Has he seen big changes from when he started fishing in numbers?
When we talk about it, which isn't that often, but he will say, I remember there being a lot more fish around. And he remembers, he's got some old photos actually from the old Settle Anglers sort of days when, you could, I remember that there's a picture that he shows me sometimes, and it's of one of the members of Settle Anglers with 3 salmon that he caught at Bridgend in September, and they're like peas in a pod, and they're like silver bullets, like we're talking they must have run really hard, but and that sort of thing you just don't see anymore. Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed where we were having breakfast down there, the photographs on the wall are not from a car boot sale, they're all from the Fox and Hounds, and they're those old pictures of the fish laid out on the grass, and they're not what we want to see these days, but it's an important part of the history of the place. But it was similar here, and they have the catch books here from just post Second World War, and it was a spring river, and then it would go quiet in May, June, July, and then August, September again, and the numbers of fish were absolutely phenomenal. And it's I guess it's symptomatic of everything that's gone on absolutely everywhere. I guess we're lucky here, and I don't know if it's the same on the Ribble, that I know we were talking about before we sat down here, that the work that's being done on the river to clear access for salmon, and I'm seeing fish further up the river now when it would just be sort of September time. I don't know if the similar sort of things are in place on the Ribble. Yeah,
you've got the Ribble Rivers Trust, which is I did some voluntary work for those guys maybe 15 years ago, when I used to work in a tackle shop in Clitheroe in Kenberries, when it used to sell fishing tackle. And I got a job there part-time when I was 13 after school. And actually, funnily enough, John Legg was the manager. So I know John really well. He was really kind to me during those days and really encouraging. In fact, me and my best friend both worked there. And we just got involved through that, and I would go and do sort of working parties and on the little becks and the tributaries and stuff. And mainly, I think they do a lot of bank restoration because it's quite an agricultural valley. So there's a lot of damage to the banks. They do a fantastic job. I follow them on Instagram, so I keep tabs on what they're up to.
Brilliant.
So it is good to see that there's definitely a respect and a concern for keeping, for things that could happen. Everything's in a fine balance everywhere, and particularly on the Ribble. So it's just nice to see that people are taking care of it and trying to give it the best chance possible.
You wrote a really nice piece for Fly Culture, I think issue 3, I think it was, about your trip home to fish the Ribble, and you ended up, the weather was against you a little bit, but it came around really nicely that you caught your fish on the Ribble. It's quite clear, and I was going to ask you the question about who was your influencer, and it's quite clear it was your grandfather. Did that sort of come via him or your father? Does your father fish or?
No, my dad doesn't fish.
No.
So, granddad. We went, actually, ironically, the first fish that I ever caught was, I was 4 years old. We were on holiday in Weymouth, and he bought me a £10 rod from Woolworths, and we went to Portland Bill with some he bought some ragworms, and I caught a sea bass.
Nice.
But it's one of my earliest memories. I just remember the float going under, and then fish on. It was a pound and a half, but I mean, to me that was a monster.
That was it. Yeah.
4 years old, and then that was it. From then I was obsessed, and I had that rod for a few years, actually, maybe 6-7 years, and that was all I would use. And we used to go all the time fishing from that. And I think the obsession with migratory fish definitely came from my best friend and his dad. And actually we were having they live in Devon now, actually, just outside of Exeter, and we were there the other day. We were just having dinner the other night, and my fiance Fran, we were sat there talking to Stuart, my best friend's dad, and he was sort of reminiscing and telling us all these stories of when we were kids, and from his perspective. And he has this saying, and I think it's from Falkers, is that effort plus understanding equals fish. And he said, you lot had the effort, but the pair of you just didn't have the understanding. We'd be down there fishing in a 6-foot flood with our fly rods, thinking that we were going to hook salmon and all that stuff. So, but the influence definitely for salmon and sea trout came from Stuart. Wow. Because he was just as obsessed as we were when he was our age, and he used to take us. He afforded us the opportunity to fish rivers like the Tyne. I remember fishing the Tyne when I was 12. Wow. And seeing salmon leaping out everywhere, and it's those things that really kind of they embed themselves really deeply. I'd love to see that on the Ribble one day, but I'm not sure it's going to happen. But
we can only keep our fingers crossed, can't we? But and I guess having those. I talked with Brett about this, how these runs have changed and how we're having to adapt to them and adjust our fishing to them as well. And like you say, I think it is effort. And I know the fish Emma had yesterday, that was her first of the year. I've only had one. Yeah. And we've just not had the water to fish for them. And I'm hoping that we're starting to get some more fish coming into the system. Yeah. Although, as we were talking about earlier, we have a visiting angler, which is great news to hear as well, that people are coming to Devon to fish as well. Had 7 in a day, and one of those amazing days, which I can only dream about.
Once in a lifetime.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And £24, £20, amazing
That's
fish.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, it's interesting. So, swinging back a little bit, actually, where you started that point was kind of interesting to me, that where you said your grandfather took you to Woolies, I think it was, or Woolworths, and bought a £10 rod. You can't do that anymore now.
No. I think you could go to maybe Sports Direct and get a Dunlop set sponsored by Robson Green or something. Yeah. I remember seeing that a couple of years ago. It's a shame, really, isn't it? It's a shame. But I guess it leads us into people getting into fishing. How do people get into fishing? And how accessible is it? But you don't see that anymore.
No, it's different. And the theme I always seem to touch on in these podcasts is somebody introducing a parent, the Mr. Crabtree effect. That it is a parent, grandparent, or whatever. Yeah. It was something. I think things have changed a little bit, perhaps, in that we are seeing cycling. I think is probably one of the big growth areas for families to do something, get outside together, and that's probably sucking people away from pastimes like fishing, like golf even is struggling from what I gather. And I wonder if that is just a function of all these little niches of niche getting people sucked away just a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think, we could probably chat about this for the next 3 hours, but, when I was a kid, I talk about this a lot, I was lucky because of where I grew up. I was on the outskirts of a town, but you could walk 5 minutes around the corner and I was in fields, and I was near a river. I had a fishing rod, had an air rifle, and which would scare a lot of parents nowadays. But and that's all I had. And I played football, so I was always outside. yes, there was PlayStations knocking around and stuff, but it wasn't as big as it is now. And you know, a lot of kids have, particularly in my line of work, which is retail technology. You know, it's just incredible how dependent we are and how kids associate that with fun, and that, you know, they have to look at they look at a screen and then they've got access to the world. They don't need to necessarily go outside, and you know, I think that has sucked people away from being outdoors and fishing. But I also, you know, being into, you know, doing a bit of teaching and doing some guiding over the last few years, I've also seen parents actively going, hang on, this isn't right, and then bringing their kids into the outdoors and thinking, well, maybe let's try fishing, or you know, let's go and try golf, or let's go and try something else. So I think there is I think there is just try and find the right words to say it, but I think there are some very conscious parents out there who are aware that their kids aren't getting what they got when they were, you know, their age, and it's affecting them. Yeah.
I think getting into it as well isn't that expensive, and you know, down here you can go fish Dartmoor for 12 quid, and that's 15 miles plus of fishing for 12 quid, and you can go play on there, and it's just life-changing water up there. And we've got all these schemes like the West Country Passport and various other schemes, Wine Usk, etc., that are making fishing affordable for people. And like you say, I think there is the realisation that perhaps it is good to get kids outside to go do some other stuff. It's interesting what we've noticed from our guiding, that I think these schemes that are put in place, and I think I talked when I did the podcast with Nick Hart about it, that the seed is being sown at a really young age, and then it may go away, and like you said, you'll get people like yourself and the people I've name checked that are obsessed by it, and it's not going to go anywhere for them. But for other people it may go away, but it's dormant for a while and comes back. And we'd noticed we had people coming through from their early to mid 30s to mid 40s that have had the fishing gene, as it were, and they've left it for a while. They have a little bit more disposable income. The children a little bit more older, perhaps, if they have them, and they treat themselves to a day's guided fishing or get themselves back into fishing. And I wonder if that's the area that we may find people again and reignite that passion. And that may also, at that age group, bring in the younger children as well, that they bring their children along. And we have many inquiries from people who want their children to go fishing, but we take them on the river and stuff, and it's a little bit more tricky. And we say, get them to a small fishery, get them into a fish, get them catching fish. I think that's
the important thing. If I hadn't have caught that sea bass that day, then I mean, I'm sure I would have got into it eventually, but it was that ignited the spark and the obsession. And you know, it's just I mean, there's so many different reasons as to why people maybe aren't getting into fishing, but then there's so many reasons why people do get into fishing as well. And you're always going to have the ups and the downs, and you're always going to have the people that say there aren't enough young people into fishing. But from what I can see, particularly with, you know, with social media, some people don't necessarily like the social media element. You have to take it with a pinch of salt, but you know, I know particularly on the Wandle that there's a lot of kids who fish the Wandle, a lot of course anglers, and you know, for me, I started fishing. I was course fishing. I used to go, you know, fishing with a worm or like a lump of bread or whatever. But that was the thing that got me into it, and then I progressed into fly fishing when I was about 10. But you know, a lot of those kids, they go because they want to put a picture on Instagram. They want people to see that they're catching fish, and you know, and it used to be back in the day, you would go and catch an amazing brown trout or an amazing fish, and you'd knock it on the head because you wanted to show everybody. Whereas now you don't need to do that. So, and there's a big, you know, there's a big catch and release sort of thing that's come over from America in the past few years, and that's really, really different to what it was when my granddad was fishing. And you know, my granddad really got into the big sort of still water fly fishing boom in the early 90s, where you could go and get your 8 fish ticket, and you know, you bring 8 trout home for tea. And and the last time we went fishing, you know, I said to him, he got a 3 fish ticket, and he caught 3 fish, but I made him put 2 back, and he didn't like it. He didn't like it, and I said, you know, you don't need to kill all those fish, Grandad. But from a man that you know, that's been his thing all of his life. You know, rabbits, pheasants, like trout. You know, stock the freezer, sort of that kind of vibe. Yeah, but it's very different now, I feel.
It is, and that's really interesting when you touch on with the social media and stuff, and you know, I think there are many positives and some negatives as well, but that's a really interesting thing, and I think certainly the younger anglers are realising catch and release, the value of it, and also the photography of fish as well. And I know in the back of fly culture, every issue that we have the keep them wet principles, and we're not trying to preach about these things, to be honest. I think if you start to do those things, then you alienate your own social circle. So we're not preaching, but you know, the magazine, we have no grip and grins and stuff like that, and if people see those things, that spreads. I think it may take time, but it works, I think.
I you know, I definitely think it does, because it's certainly got me. I remember when you sent me over the brief for the article that I wrote, and you said no grip and grins, and it did actually get me thinking, oh, grip and grins. And then what I did was I went back through the 2 previous fly cultures just to get some inspiration for the pictures, and there were no pictures of fish like out of the water, and I was like, oh, hadn't even noticed that. You know, and the photography is just as beautiful. So it's definitely got me thinking, and it's got a lot of other people thinking as well. And you know, just if I talk about my own particular journey, you know, I used to about 2.5 years ago, I made sort of a pact with myself that I was just going to be catch and release. I don't need to, you know, my enjoyment isn't out of, you know, killing a fish and eating it. And so I made this pact with myself, and actually within that catch and release element, there's been a progression of how I handle my fish. And now to the point where I leave my fish in the net, use barbless hooks. Even for salmon, I use barbless hooks. So there's been this, you know, this sort of element of I'm getting as close to leaving the fish in its natural environment as possible. You know, sometimes there's a quick lift for a picture, but it's literally a couple of seconds and then it's back in the water and off you go. And I remember talking to a fishery manager maybe a year ago, and he said to me that that the trauma for a trout comes from time spent out of the water. So it's time out of the water that is the traumatic part, which causes the most damage, in his opinion. And he said you could catch a trout, and this is evidence that he'd seen from fish being caught several times. So to put it into context, this is at Thornwood Springs, by the way, in Epping.
Peter's.
So Peter, he put 50 tiger trout into one of his lakes a couple of years ago, and those fish had been caught in the first 6 months on average 10 times each. From the catch returns. And if you know Peter, he's very hands-on. He's always around the water. He's very vigilant. He's not like he doesn't know what's being caught. And it was just amazing. And he said to me, when you take a fish out of the water, that's when they're less likely to survive and less likely to feed again. Yeah. So
it's interesting with the keep them wet. They say, you know, hold your breath when you lift the fish up. Yeah. But you've also got the added thing that I think you could add to that. Imagine yourself running round and then holding your breath. Yeah, impossible. And, you know, I think it's important to think of those things as well. And the wet hand. It's simple stuff, and a lot of the younger anglers I know are thinking about these things more deeply now as well, which is
100%.
really, really great to hear. So Ribble is your home river. You migrate though, and you head to London. What takes you that way? Is there from school? So you're in Lancashire at school.
Yep.
What happens next?
I was at school, and I was working at Ken Varies, but at this point I got into music. Had dreams and aspirations of becoming, a rock star, pop star, whatever I could do really. And I was playing guitar, I was singing, so I actually got a place at a music school in Manchester.
Cool.
So I went off to Manchester, and I'll be honest, I put my rods down for a little while after that, which, as I think most people do at some point in their lives, they come away from it, and I immersed myself in that scene. But then I think I did I was in Manchester for maybe about three years, and with anything like fishing or whatever your sport or passion is, it doesn't take that long before it starts to pull you back in again. And I remember just having I was living in Manchester city centre, and I was just having the itch to go, and I was maybe going like once or twice a year during the time when I was studying and working in Manchester. And then I Googled where I could go fishing around Manchester, and I found a river called the Goyt, which flows into, is it the Tame? Stockport?
Yeah, it could
and
be.
Which then becomes the Mersey.
Yes.
So I then became obsessed with researching the Mersey, and heard that there was, some salmon wandering back up, but it was also a decent trout river. So I went to the fly shop in Stockport. Stockport Fly Fishers.
Is it Tony? Is it Tony?
Oh, that was about 2008, 2009. So I can't remember, but I remember they were really nice. I got a membership for Disley and New Mills Angling Club, and funnily enough, it was probably the thing that maybe just pulled me away from music a little bit. Was my obsession just completely came back, and I think that's where my obsession with urban rivers started, because the Goyt used to apparently run green with foam on the top, and all the mills and the dye. Stockport's famous for hat making, all that area, so that all the dyes and effluents used to go into the river, and all of a sudden the Goyt had been regenerated. There was some lovely wild trout in there, with some grayling in there. In fact, I had my best day's grayling fishing there, 18 grayling in 2 hours.
Nice.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And I got back into it, and it was half an hour out the city. And then I moved to London, and again the same thing happened. I didn't fish properly for about 5 years.
And was that music that took you to London? Was that a plan, a band down there, or was it you thought you needed to be in London to make a career?
I think I'd exhausted all my options in Manchester. Manchester, the scene is a very, very small scene, but it's a great music scene. But I just felt like I needed to go and explore what London had to offer. And it was almost like starting again, so I left my band, went down to London.
Was that tough to do? Were you on the cusp of anything, or?
We'd had a couple of, we had a couple of managers, and they were based in London, so they were constantly travelling up to see us. And we'd had a couple of people from, A&R people from labels and stuff who would come up to see us and that we were in contact with. But I think I felt that for it to go somewhere and to be in and amongst it, rather than being out on a limb, I had to go to London. And I was at that point in my life where, I've been in London for 10 years now, so it was kind of now or never. So I just down tools and chucked all my stuff in a van one night. Nice. And went down. I literally got somewhere to live 2 days before I left.
Wow. And what sort of music were you playing? What was the style that the band was that you left? And
well, we'd progressed, so it was singer-songwriter, and then we'd got to a 7-piece. I think for all intents and purposes, we thought we were Arcade Fire, we had a good run at that, and you know, we played with some great people. I was telling you before the podcast, we played with Elbow and Badly Drawn Boy, and I'd done a couple of solo tours with you know, a guy called Stephen Fretwell, who was quite big at that point, and another guy called Liam Frost, who's sort of the Manchester darling singer-songwriter. So that the scene was really strong back then. Yeah, and then that was it. So started again in London as a singer-songwriter, and then after a year or so I signed to a management company, and they got me in different studios working with different people, and you know, gave it a really good slog, but then they decided they were not going to be a management company anymore, so then I sort of went back to doing it by myself for a little while. But all the while I had this, it's funny because I remember being so stressed about all this kind of stuff that I was, you know, because when you're in your 20s, you're trying to find who you are and you're trying to find what you want to be, and you spend so much time worrying about what other people think, and there was always something missing in my life when I was in London. And I remember one day, I was quite lucky. I used to spend 5 days a week writing songs, which when I look back now is a luxury, but at the time it was great because I could just get up, pick up my guitar. I had to be really disciplined with it, but there was a lot of pressure. So I would write my songs, record demos, send them off, and then I'd generally get an email back saying, oh, can you change this, or maybe we need to make it sound a little bit more like this. So but I remember procrastinating one day, trawling the internet, watching old John Wilson videos. Great, yeah. Just going back to my childhood, you know. I used to watch that with my granddad on a Friday night.
I remember,
about 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And I came across the Accidental Angler, which with Charles Rangeley Wilson, and it was the Wandle episode. And I went, oh, what? No, because I remember looking at the river and thinking, God, that's trouty. And I went, okay, I need to go and have a look at this. So I hopped on the tube, went down to Collier's Wood, and just sort of spent the day walking up the river. Met a local guy called Derek, who was a fisherman. Got chatting to him, you know, still friends to this day. And he sort of, you know, put me onto a couple of spots where I might find some trout, and then that was it. I didn't have my gear with me at that point, and I think the week after I went down with my gear, and my focus then shifted, because the thing is with fishing, I think, and any sort of outdoor pursuit is the meditative part of it, and it was so good for my mental health, and it just became this thing again where I could just escape. And I felt so much better after I'd done it. So I started going at every opportunity that I did, that I had. So I used to instead of writing songs, I started going fishing. And the funny thing is I now have a friend who is in exactly the same position as me, and we fish together a lot. And he will go to the Wandle for a couple of hours, but he's a really successful musician. But he'll just wander down the Wandle for a couple of hours and. It's funny because we don't actually really talk about music, which is ironic because we've got lots of the same friends, you know, from a few years ago from that scene. But he'll just send me a message, be like, and it usually starts with, "Had a couple of hours on the Wandle today," and then, okay, right, he's just going to send me pictures of fish now, and literally he'll just send me pictures of fish. So I think for him it's a nice outlet.
Yeah.
Because I don't think he can send pictures to any of his musician friends of trout that he's
who
got.
will get what he's doing.
Won't get it, yeah.
If I had to explain it, you wouldn't understand it. Yeah. It's really interesting, that programme, and that series was really, really good. I think it was on BBC Two, wasn't it? And although I don't think Charles Rangeley Wilson catches a fish on the Wandle, he heads out, doesn't he? And it's one of the Hertfordshire chalk streams, but it's a lovely emotional moment where he catches that fish, and he's close to tears, I think, isn't he, when he sees that fish and holds it for the first time, is really, really interesting and touching to see. And then, of course, that thing gets going, doesn't it? The urban streams and the clean-up of the Wandle. Theo Pike's book, Urban Trout, is just fabulous.
trout in dirty places. Inspiration for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I get a lot of messages, still say, I've read Theo's book, or I've read the section on the Wandle, could you point me in the right direction?
Yeah. And he's one of the nicest people in fly fishing as well.
Yeah.
He really is.
I mean, there are very few not nice people in fly fishing.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. That in fact, I think it was the Wandle that it was the discovery of the Wandle that is responsible for me staying in London for so long. Yeah, if it wasn't for that river, I would have probably left a long time ago. But
it's amazing, isn't it? People who are so, and I think I count myself in the same category, who are so passionate about something, and particularly their home river. Yeah. And you can travel, you can do some great things, but there's nothing quite like fishing your home river and
no, there isn't.
What the Wandle has become, I guess, your home river now, isn't it? Alongside the Ribble.
Yeah,
But it's amazing how these things have a pull on you and an effect on you as well, and affect you in such a great way. But it seems as though I've read a little bit about the Wandle over the years, and I think it was designated a sewer at some stage, wasn't it? An open sewer that was so polluted during, I guess, the Industrial Revolution. But before that, I think they were catching fish like 8-pound trout and 5-pound trout out of the river.
Doesn't surprise me. I think the last, I can't remember the exact date, but the last recorded trout to be caught on the Wandle was probably at Hackbridge, and I think that was in the late 1800s. And then that was it. There was a good sort of 15-20 mils along the river. They were all serving industry, and the river was in a proper state. And of course, because of where it is, you've got that high density of population. People just throw anything in it. I mean, you were talking about the problems you have down here on the tour about people just throwing things in the river, but on the Wandle, it is crazy. And if it wasn't for the Wandle Trust or the South East Rivers Trust and the cleanups that those guys do every month, then the river would be in a much worse state. But it amazes me the amount of crap they pull out of that river. I remember fishing once and pulling out an entire POS and cash register system.
Wow.
Like with the card reader and everything attached to a till, and it'd obviously been robbed and sort of crowbarred open and stuff, but the entire thing was just in the river.
I remember those clean-up days that they had a number of years ago, and I think it was Andy Wren would count it by the number of shopping trolleys or something that they pulled out of the river. It was amazing numbers that were coming out there, and it's been amazing to see and watch from afar how things have changed there. And again, the people are fishing it. And I remember again, I think Theo took somebody for one of the newspapers, and they travelled. It was a really interesting story. They travelled on a bus in their waders. Yeah. And the guy said, I think I'd have felt slightly more comfortable if I was naked.
Yeah. I have travelled on the tube in my waders a couple of times. Yeah. But, I guess that's one of the beautiful things about London is you can be who you want to be and no one really cares. No. You're never going to see those people again. And, I've had a few questions, actually. I've got a catch and release landing net, which I tuck into the outside of my backpack. And that's often mistaken for a racket. So I have had the question maybe 2 or 3 times from people, what sport is that racket from? Your strings are a bit loose. Yeah. That's one of the great things about London is you can, go fishing and no one really cares. I know my friend Ray and I play the wader game, and we try to go somewhere in our waders when we're fishing. So we've pushed stuff around in New Zealand, in a supermarket, in our waders. We've been in a Chinese, we've been in a restaurant on the Frying Pan in Basalt, Colorado. And that's a fishing town. They didn't even bat an eyelid, We asked for a table and just wandered in. But it's kind of interesting. But the Wandle, you've been fishing that for how many years now then? I think this year is maybe my 5th year. Yeah.
And are you seeing lots of people on the river? Have things changed over that time? Are there more...
I've seen a huge change, and speaking to people that have fished it all their lives, when I started fishing it, I think, you know, there was a few fly anglers there, you know, and the first year I fished it, I would maybe see one in every 4 trips or something like that. But now it is, you know, extremely popular. It's almost become slightly overfished. And from my observation is it's very heavily coarse fished. So I think the coarse fishing community has sort of raised the level of the river quite substantially. In terms of the fly fishing, I mean, I've definitely contributed to the fly sort of anglers on there. But I know the guys in Farlow's, they're very keen to sort of introduce people to the river, and my view is that the more people that are on the river that can look after it, then the better it's going to be.
Keeping an eye out, aren't they?
Exactly, because that river is, you know, it's literally on a knife edge. You know, one day there could be a really bad pollution incident, and it could just all, you know, be not very good. But it's the fishermen that generally, you know, are the first people to report anything before it gets worse. So,
and it's been interesting watching that again on the social media. The guys, what I would term younger anglers, fishing there. So as we said, there's yourself, there's Tom, there's Johnny. Is it Hector, yeah. And these guys, and it's just wonderful seeing these guys. Do you bump into each other? Do you fish together? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I bump into... The thing is, like, me and Tom are friends, but just through timing, we just very rarely end up fishing together. But I think we fished together last September. In fact, he did a fly culture piece. He did for a fly culture,
yeah. But you fishing there by the bridge there?
He didn't tell me, and he got his big camera out and snapping away, and I was, "Oh, it's a nice camera." And he said, "Oh, I'm doing a piece for fly culture." And it was it the first issue?
I think it was the second.
Okay.
It could be the first. It may well be, actually, now you said that. Yeah.
Luckily, I managed to catch a nice trout and dry fly that day, which was nice. So, yeah, I mean, I bump into people all the time that and actually what's really nice is people that I've guided on there, and you see them again and again, and then, you know, you get to hear about, you know, a trout that they've caught, or they've caught a barbel on the fly or stuff, and that for me is really special because you know, they've also fallen under the spell of the river, which is what happened to me. Cool. But you know, to be able to facilitate, you know, the introduction of this is where you need to go, or, you know, this stretch is great for this type of fishing, or if you want to go lower down, that's good for catching barbel or chub, that type of thing. So it's really nice to be a part of that community.
And have you enjoyed the guiding? I've
loved it. It's funny, isn't it? Because you know, if we go back sort of 10 years ago, and I was fishing with my best friend, and I saw a fish that there would be a real competitive edge to try and catch that fish, but now I'm happy to see someone else catch it. You know, I've had, so I mean, last year there were 2 standout days for guiding. I had a chap called Will, and he drove up from Exeter with his friend to fish the Wandle, and they had a Sunday evening with me. It was July. It was really hot, and we'd been fishing for maybe 3 or 4 hours, and we'd had a couple of days of roach on the fly, and we were fishing in this one spot, and it just didn't look like anything. And I said to Owen, "I know there's a trout in there, and I know that's a trout house. There's always one in there." We fished this spot for about 30 minutes, and I said, the trick is we just got to keep changing our flies. So we went through maybe 7 or 8 flies, and we put on this peeping caddis, and literally second cast, this big white mouth just came out from the depths and just hammered this caddis, and it was a 3.5 pound wild trout.
Wow!
It was an absolute bruiser. But just to see the smile on his face, you know, was incredible. And we managed to get another one. His friend managed to get another one on a dry fly a bit later on as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and then, you know, there's another standout last year. I had and it kind of goes back to what you're saying about people, you know, coming into the sport. I had a guy, he was like 72, and he'd never fly fished before, and he just took a punt at an auction and bought some fly fishing gear. I had an old Hardy and big pair of rubber waders and a few flies in a box and whatnot. And he got in touch with me because he'd come to the fly fair in London, and he saw my talk, so he took my number and then he called me up and said, can we do, you know, sort of half a day? And I said, great, what's your casting like? And he said, never done it. And I said, great, okay, I'll meet you at the river. We went into a field and we did a little sort of half an hour lesson, and then within half an hour of that, he'd caught his first wild trout. Brilliant. On the Wandle, on the fly. And then he said, right, okay, that's me, I'm done, fine.
Brilliant. Isn't that cool?
And he said, there's no need to carry on. I've done what I wanted to. I've had such an amazing couple of hours. And I was like, okay, fine, cool. So he went off home. But that was literally, you know, 72 years old, and he's just getting into it. So yeah, that was for me, that's just as good as catching a fish myself, yes, if not better. You're dead right.
And I think we touched on it with Nick, that's the key thing with guiding. And you know, if you're sitting there thinking, God, I wish I caught that, or I could have caught that, you shouldn't be guiding.
No, and that's a big part of it for me, is that you're facilitating someone else catching a fish. And I've had customers or clients say to me, "Oh, you fish for it. You try and catch it. I want to see what you're doing." And da da da. And I'm very stubborn when it comes to that sort of thing. I'll say, "No, you're gonna catch this fish, and if you don't, it's going to be there to catch another day." So, you know, it's about getting people into fish and getting them confident. And they're not going to get that if they watch me catch a fish.
Very good, very good. It's interesting you mentioned some of those species that you're catching, and it seems as though certainly this year, it's always been there. I know when I've been knocking around fly fishing so long, that carp and pike and stuff like that. And I know carp is hugely popular at the moment, but some of these other species, and it's been interesting again watching you guys catching the barbel on the Wandle. What other species are you catching there? Is that perch?
I think there is a few perch in the Wandle that they tend to be lower down, sort of near the Thames, near Wandsworth, Earlsfield, around there. Roach, there's some specimen roach in the Wandle, some really good ones. Had one about 1.5 pounds a few weeks ago. Wow. On the fly, which was, I mean, for someone who isn't really a coarse angler, before I started fishing the Wandle, if I'd have caught that fish, I wouldn't have batted an eyelid. But I appreciate that is a very good roach in the coarse angling world. So dace, you can have lots of fun if you know size 22, 24 dry flies. If you just want to, if you find a shoulder dace and they're just sipping midges off the top, you can end up standing there for 2 to 3 hours, and just before you know it, the evening's gone and you've been fishing for tiny dace. But certainly there's some big chub in the Wandle. Nice. I think the biggest one I've had on fly was probably about 5.5 pounds. A really good fish. But they'll take dry flies, they take nymphs, they take anything. So barbel, I had a 12-pound barbel about 3 years ago on my trout gear, which was just absolutely insane. Yeah. And is that sight fishing to them, or? I was sight fishing to it, but I didn't know it was a barbel. I used a really heavy nymph with some tungsten in, and it was rolling along the bottom, and I just saw the shape just move to the side, and I struck, and hey presto, it was on. Sort of hoovered up my little nymph, but it took me 20 minutes to get it in. I had a 5-pound tippet on, 7.5 foot for a 4-weight trout rod, and thankfully a pair of waders, which meant that I could get in and go down the river with it. I think I landed it 150 yards below where I hooked it. Amazing fish, aren't they? There's nothing I could do with it. My friend had to run down the river with a landing net so we could land it properly.
Yeah.
But
I went to Spain last year with my friend chasing trout in the Pyrenees, but we found barbel, and that was it. We spotted, sight fishing to barbel in knee-deep water, shin-deep water was absolutely phenomenal. Yeah,
it's incredible. And actually, I think the best barbel angler for fly fishing that I've probably, I don't think there's anyone better than Hector.
Yes, I've seen his images. It's just he's got it dialed in, hasn't he?
Wow, he's just obsessed. He's a singular obsessive angler, and he's probably the most technically gifted angler that I've ever fished with. And he's very much competition angler. So it's about time in the water, fish, how many are you catching? But with the barbel, he's just a machine. And now, of course, he's moved out of London. He's in Portsmouth now, and he's on the bass. And I don't know if you follow his social media.
Oh, I saw the picture.
But the guy was out every night for about 2 weeks trying to find some bass water before he eventually hooked into one. And now he's sort of all over it, which is great.
Fantastic. And you've done, I've watched your vlog and bits and pieces like that, and you've been out and about this year. You fished the Usk, that was fun. You did some camping and with Andy Buckley.
Yeah. That was great. The Usk brown trout is I think genetically a very special fish. And it's one of those things for me anyway that Usk is that is one of the particular strains of brown trout that it's a bit like going to the Tay to try and catch a salmon. For me, is like going to the Usk and brown trout. They kind of go hand in hand.
Yep.
And actually, as we alluded to, I hadn't been very well earlier this year, and Andy was just said, "Come on, let's do a trip." And I said, "Okay, cool, let's do it." We didn't know how cold it was going to be.
Yeah, it looked cold.
It was like it got to -3 or 4 one of the nights we were camping, and that was, I had every layer on that I could possibly get, and I still wasn't warm. But no, we had. What was really interesting was Andy is a phenomenal trout angler, and I just learned so much from him just in the 2-3 days we were together. And that I'd never really had I'd been in and around a hatch of March Browns, but not necessarily understanding what it was when I was younger. But to be on a river with an expert like Andy and then wait for the hatch, and then you have your half an hour window, and then after that it goes quiet again. But during that half an hour, it just goes mad. It's almost like mayfly, really. And just to see some of the sizes of those March Browns on the Usk, it's like
big fish, big flies.
They're big flies, some gigantic fish in there as well. Not that we saw any. On the last day, I managed to catch a really, really beautiful fish. It was, I would say, it was the most stunning wild brown trout that I've ever caught. It was something about the Usk fish. They have like orange in their eyes. I don't know if you noticed that, but the really wild fish, they've got this orange and they've got this amazing golden brown on their backs and this like blue, almost blue sheen down the flank and on the gill plates and stuff. And it was just one of the prettiest fish I've ever caught.
And the other thing I really enjoyed watching, moving on, is your trip to California, because that's sort of kind of been in the background for me. Fishing some of the streams in would it be in the Nevadas or? I don't know.
Where was I? I was in a town called Winters,
right,
which is on a creek called Puta Creek,
right.
And like, hey, I started a new job. They said, we're going to send you out to California for 2 weeks to do your onboarding, and the first thing that entered my head was, I need to find some fishing. I was like, great, this is it, but this is a good opportunity to to take the gear out, and just even if I just end up in San Francisco Bay fishing.
Which you fished there, didn't you?
Which I did. I ended up fishing, I met a guy one day when I was just under the Golden Gate Bridge, and he was fly fishing, and he caught some striped bass. And I went, oh Christ, I need to get down here. So the next night I was down there. Sadly though, I didn't catch anything. I literally had 45 minutes fishing, and then it went dark, and there was, for anyone that's ever been to San Francisco, you'll know how popular it is with seals.
Yeah. I bet,
So when you're waist deep in water and there's a seal sort of swimming a few yards away from you, it gets a bit nerve-wracking. Yeah. And you can bet your bottom dollar that there's no fish around. But yeah, I managed to. There was a chap that, again, social media, Instagram. There was a chap called Hosh who got in touch and said, "Hey man, I live half an hour from the bay. If you want to come out, we can go and do some trout fishing in the hills." And I was like, "Great, why not?" So I got up at 3 a.m. Luckily, they'd hired me a car. So I drove up, picked him up, and then we went out to Pooter Creek, and we got there just on the cusp of, when the temperature had started to get really hot, because it was April, but it was it was getting into the 30s, and I'd managed to find a shady spot, and I was just nymph fishing, and this rainbow trout took my peeping caddis. And it was about £2.
Beauty.
It took me ages to get it in, because the fight was phenomenal. It was so good. And again, probably the prettiest rainbow trout I've ever caught. Just that is, I think it was the fact that it was indigenous to that river.
Yeah.
And that's what, it didn't matter about the size of it. It was just the fact that river, that fish had probably come from a long line of rainbow trout, which originated from that river.
And do they have anything else in there? Do they have sort of the browns? Do they have cutties? Do they have brookies?
No, I'm just trying to remember. It was. I think it was mostly. I think there might be an odd brown trout in there, but it was mainly rainbow trout in the creek, in the stretch that I fished. But yeah, it was cool. Ironically, I met a guy fishing there from London.
Wow.
Yeah, what were the chances?
Yeah.
Actually, he was Polish, and he'd lived in London and fished the Wandle for 5 years, and then he'd come out to California with work.
Isn't that amazing?
Small
world fishing, isn't it?
Yeah, he was Euro nymphing, so that's what attracted me.
Yeah.
I was like, you don't see that often over here, so I went and chatted to him, and he's from London. And I was like, wow. Yeah.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it was cool.
Wow, phenomenal. And is there anywhere that you hope to head to? Have you got a destination that you're really, really keen to go visit at some stage?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I think everybody has a bit of a bucket list. For me, it's probably southern Argentina, Patagonia.
Sea trout?
Sea trout, yeah. Sea trout, and then New Zealand for the brownies. But those places are a long, long way away, and they cost a lot of money to get to. So I'm really passionate about we've got such amazing fishing on our doorsteps.
I'm with you, 100%.
In the British Isles, and even I know you've been to Denmark a lot, and I did Denmark a couple of years ago, and I did it on such a shoestring. My flight was like 60 quid return. Managed to get all my gear into a hold all. If you've got travel rods and stuff, then you hire a car. Your fishing is 15 quid for a license to fish on the coast, and you can spend 3-4 days just travelling around.
It's phenomenal, isn't it? The culture there of fishing is super cool. Yeah. A lot of people getting outside and doing that. And I think I've said on a previous podcast, apologies if I have, that you've got the Baltic in front of you and you're throwing flies out and the line goes tight. Just blows my mind. It really does. Yeah,
I mean, I think it pays to have a guide in lots of instances, and probably in Denmark too. There's probably marks that we were fishing that were maybe not considered, very good. But the fact that you can just drive around and go, oh, that spot looks good. Yeah. And for 3 days fishing, myself and I was with Oscar Boatfield. Yep. We caught 25 sea trout. Yeah, that's good. In 3 days, which isn't bad at all. No, I mean, if I didn't have Oscar there, it would have been a lot less because he'd done it before. But still, we went and fished in another country, and it was incredible. And I want to go back. I'm trying to arrange a trip to go back with a couple of friends so that we can bring the cost down even further. Yeah. But you can get out and you can fish for, very little. And there's such great fishing in this country.
I'm so with you. Even my little river, the Tor here, has everything I want. You know, we have the hatches. The fish don't get locked on till probably Granham in April time. But we have a cracking little mayfly hatch. We have sea trout that'll take a dry fly. We have salmon that you have to put the hours in for. But it has everything, and I've got Dartmoor up the road. Then you look up the country as well, and there's fishing, as you say, in the Wainusk Passport, and then you keep working your way up the country. The Ewer I love in Yorkshire, I think is a wonderful river. And then heading further, I know you were up in the Clyde. Work took you to the Clyde relatively recently, and that worked out pretty well for you.
It did, yeah. I was there for 2 weeks, again, through Instagram. I've been talking to someone for about 2 or 3 years, actually, just messaging about salmon and fishing for nice brown trout and stuff. I said I was going to come up, and he said, great, here's a piece of river, fish these 2 pools, don't move and you'll get a salmon. And I was like, okay, all right, depending on the water. And I fished every single night that I was there. And I think on the 6th night, I calculated it. I did 25 hours before I caught
That's
fish.
okay. That's good.
Which isn't too bad, but when you're surrounded by fish constantly, not, you know, and you can see them and they're about, and you get, you know, I think the day before I'd had 3 takes and I hadn't connected with any of them, but I was starting to think it wouldn't happen. And then the second to last night, I was down, and I caught a lovely little grilse, 4 1/4 pounds. Took me 7 minutes to land it, because the person who I was with filmed me, and theirs was a 6.5 minute video, so I'm giving 30 seconds from when I hooked it to when he got his phone out to film it. But just magical. You can't beat getting a salmon on a fly. It's just
amazing fish, aren't they?
Yeah. And they deserve all the respect in the world for what they go through. Those and the eel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think above any other fish species for me are, you know, they go through the most to just, you know, procreate.
And we've touched on the social media, which I think, you know, you've done a real the positives out of it, which is really, really interesting. And how do you see fishing right now? How do you see it looking ahead? Do you think it's in good shape? Do you think it's contracting? Do you think there's more people? How do you see it from where you're sitting right now?
It's something that I think about quite a lot, and I think my opinion varies sometimes depending on what kind of mood that I'm in. But I think on the whole, if you zoom out and you look at fly fishing in particular, I think is in a really good place. I see lots of young anglers, which is really good. I mean, James Penwright.
Yes, absolutely.
I remember him getting in touch with me a couple of years ago, sending me a message just on Instagram saying, "Oh, you know, I've been fishing for a little while. I'm just starting out," and you know, to see that kid just go sort of 0 to 100 within a couple of years. You know, he's just fished for England in the, you know, he caught his first salmon the other day on the Tyne.
Did he? Wow,
Stokoe,
fantastic.
Something he'd been trying to do for a couple of years. And you know, and there's lots of kids like that. And it's important that, you know, people like myself who are maybe slightly older, like myself, James, Marina. Marina is so inspirational to kids. You know, I've worked with Marina and we've taught together, and to see how she is with kids and how encouraging she is, particularly with younger girls, you know, the more people we can have like Marina in the sport, you know, the better, because it's just, it gives, you know, sometimes kids don't have an awful lot to look up to, and when they see somebody that is doing something that looks cool. See, when I was at school, fly fishing wasn't cool.
I call it the J.R. Hartley thing, and I said it in the last one. I can't. The damage that did fly fishing was.
You know. Well, you know, again, you know, when I was at school, I should have been out chasing girls and being cool and whatnot. But I wasn't. I was in the fishing club, and on a Friday night, rather than being in a park with a bottle of cider, I was, down at Hodder Foot, fishing for sea trout with my best mate Pete, and having an arguably better time doing that. So it wasn't cool, but all of a sudden, fly fishing has become something that is cool, and I think any young sort of angler who, has an Instagram account and or a Twitter or a Facebook or whatever it is, and wants to build that, has a duty, in my eyes anyway, to be encouraging of other younger anglers. So if somebody sends you a message, you respond to it, and if somebody comments on a picture, 100%, we should be encouraging as many young people, but also, they don't have to be young. It could be new to the sport and a little bit older, or just people who just want to get back into it. So I make a point of responding to everybody that gets in touch with me through any medium, because it's so important.
Fantastic. I wanted to take us we're going to wind up relatively soon, but I know 4 years ago I had a health thing that nearly took fly fishing away from me, and it made me realise, not that I needed much realisation, but how much I loved it, and it makes me love it even more. And I was tremendously sad to see you had a health issue last year. It was very, very upsetting to see, and it's great to see you in really, really good shape now. You're feeling good and everything's okay?
I had a little sort of a little wobble a couple of weeks ago, which brought everything back. I mean, for those that are listening that don't know, I don't mind sharing, because I was quite vocal about it, because I believe it's really important. I had testicular cancer, and that was so left field. It was, I was just plodding along, enjoying my life, me and Fran having a great time, and then one day in the shower I just felt a lump, and I thought, that's not quite right. I think your body sometimes has an intuitive way of telling you that something isn't quite right. And the next day I went to the doctors, and they referred me to I think it was an oncologist or a urologist. I can't remember now. But I went to see a specialist, had a scan. They confirmed that it was what it was, which was, so scary. And then 2 days before Christmas I had an operation, and then early last year I had some chemotherapy as well. But that, I can tell you, as I'm sure you know, and some people who are listening will know, just puts everything into perspective. Suddenly your list of priorities shifts, and things that weren't important are suddenly really important, and vice versa. Things that were seemingly important just aren't anymore. It just makes you appreciate, I didn't need any help appreciating being out on the water, before that, but, certainly a day on the river now is just, to me, is magical, and that's what life's about for me, is being in and around nature and in the outdoors, and, even going for a hike doesn't have to be fishing. Me and Fran walked on the coastal path from Ilfracombe to Lee yesterday and back, and it was just incredible. Everything's good now, as far as I know. I just have to keep going back for my scans, getting checked up, but it's definitely made me appreciate everything in life so much more, but also fishing.
And it's important to hold on to those things as well, isn't it? Yeah. Even as time progresses as well, and it is. And I'm really pleased to see you sitting here. We've chatted easily and freely for over an hour now, and I can see out the window here there's a bit of cloud. How about you and I go hit the river and
let's do it. Yeah.
Take Fran down, and Emma's going to meet us and bring the dog as well, and we're going to see if we can find a salmon. It's been really great chatting to you. I'm really excited to show you my little river as well. Thank you so much for coming along. It's been brilliant talking to you.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can go find some fish. So Damon,
Let's do
thank
it.
you very, very much indeed. This has been the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as the other ones. You can find us on all the usual social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You'll find us there. If you have not seen our magazine, it's a quarterly magazine. We're independent. We have no adverts in there. We publish it quarterly, and you can find out more by visiting flyculturemag.com. This is Pete Tiger signing off for the time being. Wishing you good fishing, and I'll be doing another podcast real soon. But thanks for listening, and tight lines to you all.